Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I'll go ahead and call our February 22nd, 2022 Board of Supervisors meeting to order, 2/22/22. Okay, first on our agenda, we have Reverend Hugh Matlack from Anchor of Hope and Clean Presbyterian Churches. Okay, if you'll please walk to the front. He is here to provide our invocation, and if everyone will please stand and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening.
I'm Hugh Matlack. I'm the transitional pastor for Anchor of Hope and Galena Churches in Max Meadows, and we're residents of Fort Chiswell. So our new home in 5 days. We'll be here 2 years, and we're delighted to be here. I thank you for the honor to be able to come and pray with you all tonight. I'm also the chaplain. I'm a longtime first responder. I'm a chaplain for Max Meadows Heart Company and also Lead Mines Rescue Squad. So feel welcome to bow your heads. Gracious God of all people, all places, all times, we ask you to be present with us tonight, even though we know you are with us always, ever present, in the tough times and the easy times. Still, we ask you because we want you to honor your divine presence and be among us. Given us sufficient personal skills and energy and wisdom to use who we are and what we do and for the common good. You with us add so much more than we can be by ourselves. We find we cannot find a way, you are the way. When we feel we are not enough, you take up your yoke, which is easy and helps us bear the burden. We discover controversy and opposition. You are the peace passing all understanding. So we're humbly glad you are present with us tonight, O Lord. Bless the officials working to serve our county, all of its employees and citizens. Make this meeting this evening beneficial and redemptive, especially to those most in need. Being a good shepherd of the sheep is not easy or easily appreciated. The sheep, as we know, human beings, can be cantankerous or wander off. The shepherd can be distracted or at wit's end. Provide us with the virtue and power to do well. And we know, O Lord, what you require of us, of you said by the prophet, to do justice, not for the few or privileged, but comprehensive and uplifting justice, to practice covenantal loyalty, kindness bonding us together in a world often torn and tattered, needing repair and unity, and to be and act humbly with each other and before you. These you require, and to these we submit ourselves. We ask these blessings in the name of our Christ. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Reverend. Okay. Mr. Hankins, do we need to do the public hearings before citizens' time?
It's scheduled after.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, next item on the agenda is citizens' time. We did have one person sign up, Zach Lester. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to say you guys are doing an awesome job, and we really appreciate it, and it shows how committed everybody is. Tonight, I just want to kind of point out some of our neighbors to the north. Canada's having a lot of issues. You know, Prime Minister Trudeau just issued martial law Friday on his citizens for peacefully assembling. And the reason I bring it up here is because, you know, they are such a big trade partner of the U.S. They are our largest trade partner. They share 5,000 miles of border with us, and the people are now having their bank accounts frozen, their property seized, and their families incarcerated over peacefully protesting the vaccine mandates that have just been enforced. A lot of the trucking industry has chipped in, and that's made the situation dire up there. And for our neighbors, our support is probably one of the biggest things right now. Their government is literally waging war against their own people. Our news is very complicit in it as well, and so it's not going to be on any of the main channels or anything that gives anybody any information. A lot of people are misinformed about a lot of the stuff, so I just want to give you all a couple months to think about it. before that comes to our shores and in our homes. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of similar things happen here in the U.S. And when the orders come from the top down, I would like for our county to stand against the system and say that we will not enforce military-style Gestapo on our own people. So I would really like your all's support and just get educated on what's happening outside of our little space. I know you all do an excellent job, and we really appreciate of it. But I think there are some big things that are happening. We just need to sit down and maybe talk about how we would handle if anything ever came about like that. Just want to let you guys know. Thank you again for all you do. God bless everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Lester. Okay, that's the only citizen that I had sign up. Did anyone come in late that would like to speak during citizens' time? Okay, if not, I'll close citizens' time and move down to the first of two public hearings. The first one is proposed issuance of bonds, $6 million for water and sewer facilities. Mr. Hankin, would you like to read the notice of the first public hearing?
Yes, ma'am. Notice is given the Board of Supervisors of Wythe County, Virginia. The board will hold a public hearing on the proposed issuance at one time or from time to time of bonds by Wythe County. The estimated maximum amount of the bonds proposed to be issued is $6 million in the aggregate. The proposed uses of the bond proceeds are to pay cost of capital improvements to water and sewer facilities of the county and to pay cost of issuing the bonds. The public hearing, which may be continued or adjourned, and at which persons may appear and present their views on the proposed bond issue, will be held at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard on February 22nd, 2022, before the board in the boardroom of the County Administration Building located at 340 South 6th Street in Withfield, Virginia, by the order of the Wythe County Board of Supervisors.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hankins. Would you like to give a quick overview of exactly what that means?
Yes, ma'am. This proposed short-term bond issue would help us meet cash flow issues that will arise from installing the utilities and other appurtenances for Blue Star. We know that we're going to be installing force main. We know that we're going to be building a new storage tank with the town of Withfield at Lots Gap. We know that we'll be expanding the wastewater treatment plant. So there are going to be times when we will need to fund these expenses and either draw it out of fund balance or draw it out of these bond proceeds so that we're not eating into our normal operating capital. So that's the short of it. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, does anyone have any questions before we open the floor for public comment? Okay, if none, we will go ahead and open the floor for public comment. No one signed up. Was there anyone that would like to speak? Okay, if not, then I will close the floor for public comment on that public hearing, and we will move to the next one. This one's proposed issuance of bonds for $12.115 million for public school facilities. Mr. Hankins, would you like to read that one?
Yes, ma'am. Notice is given that the Board of Supervisors of Wythe County, Virginia, the board, will hold a public hearing on the proposed issuance at one time or from time to time of bonds by Wythe County. The estimated maximum amount of the bonds proposed to be issued is $12.115 million in the aggregate. The proposed uses of the bond proceeds are to pay cost of capital improvements to public school facilities of the county and to pay cost of issuing the bonds. The public hearing, which may be continued or adjourned, and at which persons may appear and present their views on the proposed bond issue, will be held at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard on February 22nd, 2022, before the board in the boardroom of the County Administration Building located at 340 South 6th Street in Withfield, Virginia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hankins.
And this bond is for the construction of the new middle school on the grounds at George Wythe High School. That's the primary use. We know that there are other funds that are attached to it, but this is the new money that would be used for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. Does any board member have any questions or comments before we open the floor?
And Davenport is here. They will present a summary of their findings, which is, you've got copies in front of you, but they'll give you that presentation coming up under old business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hankins. And no one signed up for this public hearing, public comment section. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Okay, if none, I will close that. And before I move to payment of invoices, I left out the fact that we do have a quorum with one supervisor absent, Mr. Vaught. I'll put that in there for the minutes. Okay, let's move down to the payment of invoices.
Make a motion to pay the invoices.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Cook and a second by, was it Mr. Smith? Okay. Does any board member have a item or invoice that you'd like to pull out or have any questions about? No? Okay, if not, I'll do a roll call vote. I'll start with Mr. Cook.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Next item on our agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting, February 8th, 2022.
Make a motion to approve the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Terry to approve the minutes. Do I have a second? I have a second by Mr. Burnett. Any comment or questions about those minutes? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. I'll start with Mr. Terry.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes approved. Let's see. Okay, next item on the agenda is old business. We have Davenport here to review the financing of requesting for bids. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board. Matt and Regina and Stephen, I think, is virtual, so hopefully he gets well soon. What you have in front of you and I'd like to speak to is this presentation material that we have here as well. This is the results of the RFP process that we undertook. I think my colleague was here, David Rose, last time to talk about the process and sort of the approach. I'm here to present the initial findings and results and sort of seek your direction with respect to the balance of the calendar with respect to the recommendations we have in here. On page 1, just an overview of the Bank Rfp process. We did, on behalf of the county, distribute the request for invitations for bidding on providing the funding that we talked about here for both the new money, which you had public hearing on, as well as the refinancing of some USDA loans that don't require a public hearing tonight because they've already been issued. So we did that and distributed that RFP to over 100 local, regional, and national banking institutions. We set it up with respect to a lot of flexibility. We weren't sure exactly how the nature of the proposals were, so we did ask for the ability to separate the bond out, the school bond and the refunding bond. And also, we have that short-term credit facility that we asked for as well, which is the line of credit or the bond anticipation note, for which about the $6 million public hearing that you've had tonight as well. That being said, we'll go through the process here of what our recommendation is. We did clarify with the banks, that is the best bank proposal in here as to the way we can do this. So we think it's a lot simpler as a result of the proposals we received. Ahead of the deadline for proposal submission on February 15th, we did receive 6 proposals for this long-term financing, both the refinancing and new money for the schools. And you could see that came from a variety of banking institutions you may or may not know. Capital One Public Funding Corp., First Bank and Trust. We did receive the proposal for that on the short-term piece, but with respect to the others, Key Government Finance, National Bank, Truist, which is the old BB&T and SunTrust, and then Webster Bank. So those are basically the 6 institutions that submitted proposals for some combination of the funding we're looking for at tonight. On page 2, I'd like to go in a little bit of the market conditions as to and the interest rate environment that we're looking at. As you probably have all been watching and hearing, interest rates are trending up. Combination of the Fed, but it's also a combination of just general market uncertainty as well as a lot of sort of inflationary pressures. So that's causing interest rates to be sort of in the general trending upwards over the next, what we'll call 3, 6, 9 months in the time frame of the balance of this year. So we're still, even though they are trending up, we're still in a really good market environment for borrowing with respect to refinancings as well as new money. You can see on the right-hand side of the page, we've just sort of expanded the most recent few years here of interest rates, and you can see we're generally in that 2 to 2.5% range, you can see from an index standpoint. And that shows you we're historically near the lows, but not exactly at the bottom of the lows. On page 3, proposal comparisons with respect to what we asked for. This is the long-term financings, and we asked for it in the combination of potentially splitting the bonds up into an A and a B series. A and a B, for the schools being one piece of it, the refunding being the other, to see if there was any advantage of doing that. Really was not a material advantage at all with respect to splitting those up. Sometimes banks tend to like refinancings more than new money, so that's why we wanted to ask for that sort of concept. But you can see here with respect to the proposals we received, we did this in alphabetical order, but as you go down the list here, we look at the bottom, which is highlighted in green. Webster Bank did provide the lowest fixed rate, interest rate to maturity. That is to say, we're looking for about a 20-year loan on this. They're providing a rate for the entire 20 years, so that will not change. Some of the other banks, just to give you an example, they asked to fix the rate to a shorter period of time and maybe have that readjust. We call that just a one-time variable rate feature. We tend to shy away from those because we like to know what our costs are going to be, and especially if we can lock in a rate to maturity, that, as you know, your cost of funds are not going to change over the life of the transaction. So being where we're at here in terms of the low interest rate environments, we think that feature is the best of all worlds in terms of that respect. One other feature is that we do have the ability to prepay this loan in about 7 years without any penalties. So that's a nice feature to have in case you do need to or would desire to prepay that earlier than usual. That feature's built in. Just so you know, we're going to compare this Webster Bank proposal to what you can also source through the Commonwealth's funding programs. That's Virginia Public Schools Authority. Just as a comparative there, Virginia Public Schools Authority allows you to prepay as well, but that's typically a 10-year prepayment. So you have a little more flexibility here, a little bit faster in the bank approach. Preliminary results with respect to looking at the Webster Bank proposal, we've run just some summary numbers at a high level on both the school's new money and the utility refunding, just to say what is your total debt service cost over the life of the issue. If we're borrowing just a shade over $12 million at 2.57%, that principal and interest or total debt service is just a shade under $16 million. That's principal and interest paid back over 20 years at that 2.57%. The refunding, we separated that out as well. The total refunding, and what I'd like to point out to you as well, that's about $4.57 million, in total debt service. But what you can see right below that, the refunding generates about $870,000 of cash flow savings. So by nature of doing this refunding, you've shortened the debt, and we'll show you that in a minute, and you've cut off about $870,000 of interest. That's a lot of interest for the size of this refunding. When we do the present value calculation of that, and that's a way of measuring the worthwhile or effectiveness of the refunding, you can see right below that NPV savings dollars, and then as a percentage, what those dollars mean, that's about 15% of the debt that you've refinanced. Typically, just to give you an idea of what that percentage means, the benchmark for sort of an effective refunding is about 3%. So we're about 5 times in excess of what's considered an industry standard or worthwhile refunding. So this is a very solid, very good cost savings with respect to this transaction. On the next page, page 5, just to show you what the debt service looks like. On the left-hand side of the page, this is the school's debt service, and you can see that it starts lower on the front end and kind of ramps up to that level debt service approach, and we'll show you what that means in context of the overall county portfolio on the next page or so. On the right-hand side of the page, you can see that refunding of those 4 USDA loans. Your prior debt service, or what you have right now, is in that first column, that prior debt service column, and you can see the payments every year. And you can see those go out to almost they actually do go out to 2051. So that's quite a ways out in terms of the payments. What the refunding has done is that's shortened those payments and reduced those payments in every single year, but it's really cut off and allowed you to save basically about 8 years of debt service. So you're shortening out that debt, paying off faster, and you're also paying it off at a lower rate. So it's allowing you to thus save that $870,000. What we like about this is that, one, it doesn't affect your budget at all in terms of the water and sewer side, but also it does provide a little bit of a benefit, but also by shortening that debt, it really helps out future capacity in future years for capital investment. So you kind of build up that ability to invest at a later date, and you can invest sooner rather than later by shortening that debt up. So that we feel is a nice benefit of this type of transaction. With respect to the impact on the schools debt that we're looking at in terms of the proposed debt, on page 6, we've just overlaid the new debt, that new $12 million in debt service, on top of the existing debt service that you already have. And we did that in context of what the current budgeted amounts are for that total debt service. And you can see that with the exception of the first year, it's a minor increase up, one-time increase, but every year after that, it goes back down below the current budget number. We see that, to the extent that in 2023, there might be a little use of what we'll call one-time funds, but then you recoup that very quickly in 2024, and then 2025 and thereafter, it really starts to build in capacity and the ability to add new investments as needed in future years over time as well. So this fits in really nicely within the county's portfolio and keeps that future flexibility for future investments as well.
What year, you know what year the current school debt service is paid off? Is that 2024?
The,
2025?
It's one of the two, and we've asked that question several times. If you remember, Dr. Poole, when we met to talk about the school budget for the year, talked about some of the financing options that the school would like to see us undertake, and we agreed at that point that, yes, 2023, we would have a higher budgeted amount, but that because of the debt falling off in 24 and 25, we would see lower payments start to come in at that time.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering whether 2025, the debt service will be gone to make up for this increase here.
It will be.
Okay.
So on page 7, we also wanted to evaluate the potential for the county to participate in Virginia Public Schools Authority. That, as I've said or alluded to earlier, that is a widely used, acceptable financing mechanism for school capital investment throughout the Commonwealth. A lot of counties, cities participate in those routinely as well. Virginia Public Schools Authority sells their bonds on behalf of local governments twice a year, and they have a fixed schedule for that. The schedule that they're undertaking right now is approximately May of this calendar year, late April, early May, in terms of selling the bonds and locking in the interest rates. We also wanted to note that utility refunding could not be done through VPSA, so if we're to do and separate these out, you'd have 2 bonds, back to the whole 2-bond concept. But the one thing we wanted to point out is when we looked at the VPSA transaction, we're very close. If you look at current market rates, we're very close to what Webster Bank has given us. And again, couple of considerations. Webster Bank, you can think of, might be a little bit higher right now, but we do have a shorter call, so you get a little bit of a benefit for that sort of higher interest rate there. But when you look at the cost of funds comparison, that's about a 0.37 difference. So they're probably, to say it simply, they're 0.37% cheaper than the current Webster Bank approach. That's about $500,000, $400,000 to $500,000 in today's market. The caveat, though, is those interest rates will change daily up until the point in time VPSA sells its bonds in late April. That's about 30 to 45 days plus when you think about that timing. And just to give you a point of note, that interest rates have been trending up. To let you know where we stand today versus 45 days ago, rates have moved up about 0.5%. So there's something to be said here. We've got a defined cost in hand, removing the interest rate risk. If you look at the VPSA, all it would take is 0.37% change, and we're back where we are today. So just keeping that in mind, that's the analysis we undertook and factors into kind of our recommendation here. We think that based on where market conditions are, going to the next page, on page 8, based on where market conditions are, it's highly likely that interest rates are going to continue to trend up. It's the Fed's decision. It's also when you look at geopolitical issues, such as the issues in Russia and Ukraine, that kind of affecting the markets as well. There's that strong chance that rates will keep moving on the upward direction. Based on that context and how close we are to the VPSA markets, we would recommend that with the Webster Bank proposal, we've got a bird in hand, we've got something that's known and defined, gives us the school funding at very attractive cost of funds. It also allows us to do the refinancing, very attractive cost of funds, and then just takes that interest rate risk off the table. We know what we're going to get at that point.
And it's a 20-year loan as opposed to a 10.
20-year loan, 20-year interest rate. The other loans might have been 20-year repayments, but they had 10-year interest rates. So, we would not, if we had the ability to do a 20-year with a 20-year rate, it's a full term. We all like to know what our mortgage payment for is going to be, for example. We don't want that rate to change, ideally. This is sort of the same concept. We don't want that rate to change in year 10. So.
And Regina and Stephen and I, in working with Davenport last week, our belief is that interest rates will move enough that it's going to be a negligible difference. I think our preference is the security of what we have here, and so that would be our staff recommendation.
Well, it looks like it's about $500,000 for the hire for guaranteed, for the 20-year guaranteed at the same interest rate, so.
Yeah, it's $500,000 versus the VPSA, which would also be guaranteed for the same 20 years,
Right.
but we just don't know. We won't know what that rate is until about 45 days from now. So that's our recommendation with respect to Webster Bank and kind of the funding for the schools as well as the refinancing for the utilities. On page 9, we're showing you the proposal comparison for the short-term financing. This is that concept of the bond anticipation note with a line of credit. We did ask for both. The 4 institutions that provided that funding mechanism provided a variety of different approaches. But essentially, First Bank and Trust, as a point of note, was the only one that provided the line of credit. That is to say, if you don't need to use it, you don't need to spend on it, but for just closing it. Now, if you do need to use it, though, they have the highest interest rate, 3.25%. Key Bank, the opposite end of the spectrum, said, yep, we're going to offer you this at the probably the lowest cost of funds here at 1.862%, but you do have to draw it all at closing, so you're going to fully fund that, and it'd be like a loan that you take and you have the money to spend. Whereas the First Bank and Trust, you have access to it, and as you spend it, you pull it down. So you're only charged on rates as you pull that down. We did also want to point out that with respect to First Bank and Trust, you can pay that off at any time without any penalty because it is a credit line. The Key Bank said after 12 months, you could pay that off without any penalty. So it at least has to be outstanding for 12 months. So we did a little bit of pros and cons on the next page, and really there can be an argument for each side in terms of this. Looking at the First Bank and Trust proposal, we said it's got the highest interest rate. However, it is a line of credit, and as with the line of credit, you don't have to pull down a substantial amount. You just have to pull down enough to close it. So you wouldn't be paying on much, if anything, in the initial sort of setup of that. But if we look at, just say hypothetically, if you were to draw down 3 million of that, and that's what you had kind of outstanding, the cost would be about $97,500 in terms of that. We did also confirm that, you could use as much as you need of this or as little as you need, so there's a lot of flexibility there. And as well, with respect to this, I mean, if you didn't use a lot of it, it really is kind of an insurance policy to help protect that unassigned fund balance for other needs and other purposes. So back to drawing about 3 million. Let's say if you did draw the 3 million, you're paying right under 100,000 in round dollars. With a key bank approach, if you drew it all down, you'd be paying just a little over 100,000, about 112,000 a year. But that's $6 million of funding versus the 3 million on the first bank in terms of that. So we do see the benefits potentially. I mean, if the idea here is to have the conservative approach of having the money in hand, because we don't know where the grant timing is and the reimbursements are, you'd have with the key bank approach, you'd have all of the money in hand day one, and you'd have the ability to repay it back after 1 year as the grants come in very quickly. But with the first bank and trust proposal, if it's a higher interest rate, if you didn't have to draw it down, then you'd sort of save on the interest expense. So it's really, kind of a decision-making, sort of weighing the factors there as to which one's better. And that's Matt, if you had any thoughts?
We're very much shooting in the dark here. We don't know, we know we've got bids out for some of these large projects, the water tank engineering and the wastewater treatment plant expansion engineering. Both came in the 14th, and we're looking at those. Then we'll have the construction cost that we have to pay. We'll have other project costs, the force main, some of the other related costs on this. So we don't know what the timing is going to be or how much we're going to need or when we're going to need it. We just know sort of a general idea of what we might have to lay out at one time. Of course, that's our worst case scenario too. But if we have the $6 million, we have it in hand, we can use it and not touch our fund balance. And basically what we know we're doing is paying, that $112,000 as sort of the convenience fee of having the full amount available. The more conservative route would be going with the First Bank and Trust, higher interest rate, but if we don't draw as much or don't need as much, then we pay less. We just don't know if it goes, higher, if we have to pull down $5 or $6 million of that, then obviously we're paying double what we would have paid with Key. It's a coin flip. It really is. It really comes down to what's your preference. If it's me, I'm going to say draw the $6 million at the lower interest rate. That way we have it if we need it. But there's nothing wrong with the other approach that says let's not borrow it until we need it and try to maximize our savings.
So your recommendation would be the key bank approach,
That's mine.
your opinion?
That's mine. Stephen's
Okay.
on the line.
Yeah, I think for me, so the first example of the 3 million, it's gonna cost us $97,500. So if you take the whole 6 million, it's $195,000.
Exactly.
So to me, I'm kind of with you, Mr. Hankins. If you draw it down, you've got the money at your disposal. The other piece of it is the last bullet point at the bottom. If we draw it all down and we wanna pay it off, we just have to sit on it for a year and then we can just turn around and pay it off.
Right.
And we're not, realistically, we wouldn't pay it off within a year anyhow. I mean,
Right.
those grants, by the time they come in, we're gonna have her 12 months.
Right.
So, I mean, I agree, I think Key Bank is the best.
Okay. Well, the last page of my presentation is just sort of a timing. Today we stand here, we've had the public hearings. I think the next steps is, and I think I've heard, at least on the line of credit, or the short-term piece, I've heard Key Bank is sort of the direction to go in. Just with respect to that, getting the recommendation, our recommendation is Webster, getting your input as to proceeding forward with that. Then we would come back to you on March 8th with all the final documents for approval. and then really close on the transactions within the balance of March, if not by mid-March.
Okay. Thank you.
So the action that would be needed tonight would be to authorize Davenport to proceed if you prefer the Webster Bank option for the long-term school debt and utility debt refinancing. And with the option, it sounds like most of you are in favor of the Key Bank, the full $6 million drawdown at the lower interest rate. If that's the intention of the board, then I would need a motion to proceed, allow Davenport to proceed to the next steps and then bring you back the formal documents in
I'll
early
make the
March.
motion that we have Davenport proceed with Webster Bank and Key Bank.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Cook and a second by Mr. Smith. Are there any questions or discussion? Anything else for Davenport? No? If not, I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank
You all changed the seats on me and I still can't. Okay. Okay, Mr. Hankins, anything else under old business?
Not that I'm aware of, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll move down to reports. First report we have is Treasurer, Ms. Gwen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'll go over the financial report for January, and then I'll kind of give you an update of projects that we're going to have coming up over the next 30, 45 days to make you aware, because it may generate a phone call or two for you. To start with, the financial report for January, the total cash balance on hand was $75,460,272, and within that, the balance in the general fund is $51,081,906. So a little bit of an increase over December, as you'll notice on general fund there on the what's actually the first full page of the treasurer's report. So, are there any questions on anything through that report, or maybe even the finance director's report, either one, since she's here as well?
Any questions? I don't believe so.
Okay. We're, of course, continuing to collect taxes. A lot of folks are getting their income tax refunds right now, so a lot of payments are coming in. Still not really any hiccups as far as folks and their willingness to pay the 3% fee for the credit cards. A lot of folks just have not missed a beat, and they're paying it anyway. Some have opted to still come in and pay cash or check, but for the most part, most folks are, they're okay with the fee. So, which, wasn't sure how it would go over at first, but I think collectively, when all of our departments are on the same percentage, and then we're also on the same percentage as Town of Withfield, everybody's getting a uniform rate there, so most seem to be okay with it. Going forward, by the time I'll be here next month, we'll be in the process of getting ready to send out the delinquent notices for real estate and personal property. So my goal is to get those files pulled close to around the middle of March and get those out to the printers so that they hit the mailboxes around April 1st, maybe even March 31st, somewhere in that range. We're trying to make sure we've got everything up to date and clean up our files related to dog tags, and another mailer will be going out on dog tags, so Mr. Horny, be prepared. We'll send those out as well. So we're kind of just trying to, on that aspect, get everybody in compliance, but also send out those reminders as well. A lot of folks are coming in, but some, we have a lot that they're not going to come until you force them to. It's kind of like paying taxes with real estate and personal property. So those are some projects we have going on in our office over the next 30, maybe 45 days at the most, but I hope to get the dog tag renewals out at least by the end of March, maybe by mid-April at the latest, but somewhere in that range. So Outside of that, we're also working on delinquent mills tax collections that the Commissioner of Revenue's office turned over to us a few weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. Due to me being out in December, it kind of got delayed, so I've been working on that through January and into February. So we're working with a lot of those businesses to try to get them caught up and make sure that they get their mills tax paid. So that's an update on us. Anybody have any questions on anything or anything that I may not have mentioned that I need to mention? Okay, y'all are an easy group tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn. Okay. Commissioner, Ms. Vaught, do you have anything to report this evening?
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
I just wanted to give an update on the reassessment. I spoke with Mike Colavecchi. I'm not sure exactly how you say his name. He has pushed things back another week. Supposed to get a file to the printer on March the 1st. If he gets the real estate file to the printer, it'll be about a week before they mail out the notices. So that's putting us about the middle of March. Does anybody have any questions about that or anything else?
Oh, man.
Hopefully they'll get that done then, because they're gonna put me in a bind with no new figures to work with, so
I understand that.
I wish they'd
Right
kinda,
on budget.
come on. Does anybody have anything?
I don't believe so. Thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Okay. Next, we have the sheriff. I do not see him. Major Thompson, do you have anything to report? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is new business, consent calendar.
I'll make a motion, we approve the consent calendar.
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Cook. Do I have a second? To approve
Second.
the consent calendar? Mr.
Madam Chair, I would just point out the nice, bright, new, shiny green trash compactor at Max Meadows is now in service. So folks there should see some improvement in their level of service with that new equipment.
That's exciting news. Okay. Any discussion or questions? If not, I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Terry?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes.
And Madam Chair, our next item on the agenda was scheduled to be the Apex Center. Mr. Ayers was going to make the presentation tonight, and he has an illness in his family and wasn't able to attend, so he's asked for your indulgence to move that discussion to March the 8th.
Okay, no problem.
I have one question on that, if I may, Lee.
Okay.
Have they paid us yet, Mr. Hankins?
No, sir, they have not.
Tomorrow's their deadline, correct?
Yes, sir.
There's no need to have a discussion on March the 8th.
Okay. So,
Well, that's the pleasure of the board, whether the board wants to have a discussion on it. You know, that's your recommendation or
Yes, sir.
motion, but it's really the pleasure of the board if you want to entertain a policy
okay.
or how you want to proceed.
Well, you guys know where I stand. We've talked to them and we're blue in the face and still no money. They've had all the events that they've had, still can't get paid. It can't self-support itself, and it's time to pull the plug. I mean, there's no sense in wasting more time and spinning wheels. How many times have we met with them? It's just where I'm at.
So what
I
do you
did speak to one
propose we
of
do
the-
with it?
Put it on the market. I mean, what else are we gonna do with it? I mean, it's costing us.
Do they have any events scheduled that may bring in some income, or do we just shut it down completely? I mean, that's why, do we sell, I mean, selling it, okay, but what do we do between now and the time itself? Do we let it sit empty? Do we let them continue to operate? What do we do? That's my only question is,
I mean, if they wanna operate while we got a for sale sign in front of them, I'm fine with that too, but,
Well, I think right now we need to wait till they default on the,
and that's
That's tomorrow, right?
Yes, sir.
and I think that then we pick the conversation back up on the March 8th. And we can still do that, right, Mr. Fowler? I mean, we can,
Yeah.
whether to let him speak or not during that night.
Yeah, that's your pleasure, how you want to proceed. They're in default, you anticipate they're going to default, and it's just a matter of how you want to decide to address the default.
Okay.
I mean, part of the reason they defaulted was because we didn't fund them what we told them we was gonna fund them.
course, everybody knows how I feel about that, right?
Yeah.
We giving them money to give us back.
Right, I mean, but that's what I'm saying is, I mean, basically, we were giving them, we had scheduled to give them $200,000. Of that $200,000, they were gonna turn around and give us $180,000 roughly, $160,000
A little over 160.
of it back in rent payment, which they can't give us back because we didn't give it to them. But, I mean, and then we were getting whatever we were getting from the admission tax, which is something that you can measure, but then there's other taxes that we can't measure.
Well, I know they've had 3 good events down there, because they've blowed us up with the pictures and all that. And then, of course, I attended the one this past Saturday, just to see it for myself, so.
Well, I don't know who did the one this past Saturday, but to me, they didn't have very good advertising, so but the way I understand it, it was packed.
That is true, they didn't advertise, but it was standing room only. They had to bring fold-out chairs for everybody to sit in.
Right.
And it was,
I mean, I've told y'all time and time, I mean, I'm not opposed to selling it, but I am opposed to it just sitting up there empty and us doing nothing with it, not even trying. I mean, can they write contracts, Scott, in a way that if we sell it, either we have to honor the contract or we have to pay so much for breaking the
Yeah,
contract?
I'd have to look at that and see, yeah. I think it'd be hard to get somebody in there, you know,
Yeah.
who's gonna be there in June when I wanna have my event.
Right.
They've already paid for advertisement and everything else
But
at that
I
point.
mean, that's the reason I was thinking
You
you
could have some
could.
kind of penalty, but if I'm having my Sportsman's Association show that day and you pull the plug on me, I don't have anywhere to go.
Well, but I mean, I don't think you would pull the
You pay
plug.
me money.
I don't think it would be a pull the plug instantly today. I mean, we're not gonna sell it that quick, I don't.
Yeah, I don't know how far they schedule the events out.
Right.
Am I calling to schedule something in September or December? You know, I have no idea. But you're not gonna get, I mean, I don't know, this is just my speculation, you're gonna have a hard time renting that event far in the future
Right.
with you guys trying to sell it at the same time. Maybe, maybe not.
for me, one of the interesting things is, once we made the decision to pull the funds back, events got booked.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
I mean, they got booked quick. And I know there was 2 promoters there Saturday night. I spoke to one of them
Yeah.
for different events. And if that mindset would have been happening all along, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in.
That's a fact. Well, maybe. But I mean, if COVID hadn't happened, we wouldn't be in, we might not be in this situation.
That's
I
true,
ain't gonna
too.
say we wouldn't.
Right.
Because it's still a lot of guessing game.
But, Madam Chairman, I think, for me personally, I think we need to wait till they default and then have that conversation.
Yeah.
March 10th.
I believe we anticipate what's going to happen tomorrow, but we can have conversations after that. But with everyone else.
I'd like to be able to talk with
Oh, I understand that too.
Yeah. Well, that's true, because
Yeah,
you haven't had that opportunity,
you.
so.
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, we will discuss it further then after tomorrow. Okay. Next item, we have East Withfield polling location. Mr. Hankins or,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start, and Lennon can fill in if he needs to.
Okay.
The request is for the board to set a public hearing for March 22nd to amend the Supervisors District and Voting Precinct Ordinance to move the East Withfield polling station to Spiller Elementary School. This request has been made by the electoral board. Mr. Couch, do you want to elaborate?
I can. I'm gonna stand back here, if that's okay. I have some limited mobility issues right now. We're making this request at the moment mainly because of the Chicago Festival. In 2021, the legislature moved the date of the June primary, and that falls the same week that Chicago falls. So it would make the community, or the old rec center inaccessible during that time period. So it's mainly the reason why we're making that request to Spiller. Our plan is to use the cafeteria entrance at Spiller, so it is probably a little bit more accessible than what we currently have, because it's a closer walk from the parking lot into the building. So that is our reason for making that request.
thank you, Lennon.
So is that just a one-time thing, or were you moving it forever?
So it will be for every election for the next 10 years.
Until we change it.
Or until a better location comes around. So, and that's what comes down to too, you know, we can't, the code won't allow us to have a precinct or have a polling place designated for a primary and then come back and use across the street for a November election, basically. So,
It would confuse people anyway.
and that would
so.
also,
Hopefully Spud won't be there in 10 years.
well, and that's what Dr. Poole told me too, so.
That's the goal.
And yeah, so that'll be something to come back to. At the moment though, I mean, we have explored several locations in the East Withfield district, and that was just really the best one and the one we were told yes, that we could use. So,
That helps.
yeah, that helped too.
Okay. Any questions for Lennon? Okay. I'm assuming we need to, let's see, take action to set the public hearing.
Yes, ma'am, a motion to set the public hearing would be in order.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Terry, a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horny. You'll have to bear with me. Okay. Any more discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. We have a public hearing set for March 22nd. Okay, moving on to staff reports. First, we have Assistant County Administrator, Mr. Hankins, the man with the plan tonight.
I hadn't intended for it to be this long, but here we go. I have 3 action items I would ask that you consider tonight. The first is approving a letter of recommendation for a Virginia Outdoors Foundation grant. This would fund the creation of 2 boat launches and ramps along Reed Creek in support of our outdoor tourism initiative and recreation initiatives. If you would consider that, I would appreciate it. And Ms. Delp, who has been working on this grant application, would appreciate the support. The Joint Public Service Authority has approved a similar letter because they, part of their property would be used for one of the boat ramps.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hankins. I'll entertain a motion that we approve this letter for the Virginia Outdoors Foundation for the Reed Creek access.
Do we know where it's gonna be, where they're wanting to put them?
Yes, sir. It's going to be, the first one would be on Kent's Lane, right at the trash transfer station. That would be, each of these would be about roughly 6 parking spots, a gravel lot, and a few picnic tables. I know picnic tables at trash transfer doesn't sound ideal, but people picnic down there as it is. And then the second location would be on some property that we're working with AEP on in Max Meadows.
I'll make that motion, Madam Chairman.
Okay,
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Smith, a second by Mr. Terry. Any more discussion? If not, I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. Thank you all. Next.
Second item, I have a request from Mr. McCabe to pay the call-out funds for the first 2 quarters. Barron Springs, $1,309 roughly. Ivanhoe, $1,183. Max Meadows, $3,473. And Speedwell, $1,535. Would ask for a motion to authorize the payment to those agencies.
I'll make that motion then.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Terry to authorize these
Second.
payments. I have a second by Mr. Smith. Any questions or discussion? If not, I'll do another roll call vote. Mr. Terry?
Aye.
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 I'm sorry. Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next item, Mr. Hankins.
And my third action item, I ask that you authorize the Finance Department to pay $129,000, which is the balance on Ivanhoe Volunteer Fire Department's new brush truck. The truck cost $172,000, of which $43,000 has already been paid on deposit. The truck is almost ready for shipment, and if you want to see the truck, it is on the 3rd page of my report. Would ask that you move to authorize the cutting of that check. It's outside of your normal check cycle.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Burnett.
Second.
Got a second by Mr. Terry, was that you?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
second by Mr. Terry. Any questions regarding this brush truck for Ivanhoe?
Why is one side painted red and one side painted orange?
You'd think truck dealers could afford better cameras.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
How much more is it gonna cost us to completely finish outfitting with the hoses and all that, you know?
It's gonna vary depending on what the department wants to do, and they can fund that out of their budget that the county has, as long as it's within reason. You know, it can be, you know, $25,000 to outfit a truck with hose, with, you know, all the tools that are necessary to fight fire, you know, the nozzles, you know, generators, anything else that they want to put on the truck, but it varies by department based on what their particular needs are. In this case, I wouldn't anticipate you'll see a lot more on this truck, because you've got the two hose reels with 150-foot hoses on them. Really, probably the only thing additional that they need is some hose to go on that nozzle that you probably can't see. It's on the front. It's a pump and roll truck, so it can actually move while it's pumping water. So it's a better brush firefighting tool.
Okay. They shouldn't come back after this for more money.
I know enough fire chiefs, I wouldn't ever guarantee that. And I'm not just slating the ones here.
Okay, any more questions or discussion? Okay, do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Under my Believe It or Not items, we have reached our last point of agreement with Department of Wildlife Resources, Staff Council, and we're waiting on their final review copy for the Rural Retreat Lake lease. We did better on this than I thought we were going to do. So I'm looking forward to getting that final copy in front of you for review. We hope to do that at your next meeting, so that we can go ahead and enter into that contract with DWR. There was one thing that we had asked for, and that was automatic renewal. They will only do maximum 5-year lease terms, and we'd rather just say if somebody hasn't said we're gonna end that we continue with those, but the Attorney General's office has reviewed it and said that doesn't meet state statute, so we have to ask for a renewal, and that was the last thing that we were holding out hope for. So if we get that clean copy this week, we'll go ahead and circulate it to you. That way you can see it and be prepared for your next meeting.
Thank you. I hate that Mr. Vault had to miss that update. He's been waiting on for years.
Under personnel, we have hired a 911 deputy director, Jamie Grubb. Will start in that role March 1st. She is our most senior dispatcher. She was interviewed by representatives of the ECC board, which represents all the funding agencies that fund our consolidated 911 dispatch. And she was a very strong candidate and was recommended for the hire. On the dispatcher side, we have received 34 applications or letters of interest for that position. We've screened 24 of those as potentially qualified. Of those 24, we invited 12 to test, and 6 have tested so far. We have additional tests and interviews being scheduled for later this week, so I would anticipate that we'll have some hires made to get some dispatchers in training and hopefully have those folks up and ready to go by late summer. We are going to advertise the shift coordinator position for 911 later this week. That will be the sort of the go-between between the management and the shift supervisors. Each shift will have a supervisor under the new organizational structure that we've contemplated. So that shift coordinator is the next position to consider. On purchasing and procurement, like I've said, the Ivanhoe brush truck is just about completely through. There's one thing that I've asked them to look at that I think doesn't meet NFPA standard that they need to look, and it's just some detail, some striping on the back of the truck. So I anticipate that truck will be delivered late next week if we get the check cut and out to them this week. The Ivanhoe pumper tanker has been sitting across the street for a while, waiting for its drop tank. We think it's sat there long enough, it needs to be put into service for Ivanhoe, even if it doesn't have the drop tank in it, so we're gonna get that out to them, this week. There's been a couple of small things that were installed on it this week. Once those are complete tomorrow, we anticipate we'll be able to get it down probably to Ivanhoe on Thursday. The Speedwell pumper tanker is in the same boat. The drop tank, apparently that's a major production issue. We expect delivery on that truck in March. We'll get it out to Speedwell so they can operate it even if they don't have a functional drop tank, just so that they can go ahead and get that truck in service. We are in contact at least once a week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week with the vendor, just to let them know that we want updates as soon as they're available. You all know that we've been working a lot on getting RFPs and procurements out there for some of our Blue Star related projects and other services. We had a RFP out for commercial realty services. Those were due February 10th. We did not receive any, so staff is going to reach out and try to engage with some realty agencies and bring you back an agreement with somebody who we think can market those properties. Specifically, that was for the properties that adjoin the Apex Center along Chapman Road and along Pres Jackson Road on the upper side. Pete and Mort's has its bids out for construction of the sewer force main to serve Blue Star. Those bids are due March 17th. We got 5 proposals for Lots Gap Engineering and also for the wastewater treatment plant expansion. Both those came in on the 14th, and staff has gone through, scored those. And Mr. Crisp is going to be reaching out tomorrow to the top 2 on those responses. I know some of you are interested in the public service radios. We had had responses for RFPs due today. We received 3, and those range from about $88,000 for engineering all the way up to $2.4 million for complete replacement, outside our budget and what our expectations were. We'll be looking at what our options are. We'll make a recommendation to the Fire and Rescue Committee for its consideration next week so that they can come back to you with a recommendation at your March 8th meeting. Other than that, I think you can read through and see the report. I did want to point out the lead mines rescue squad expansion is continuing. If you drive by and see that it doesn't have roll-up doors, apparently roll-up doors are one of those things that we can't get because of supply chain issues, so those are causing a delay. The roll-up door that was on the right-hand side of the old building has been taken out. They've reskinned the building, re-insulated it so that they can start work on the bunk room areas inside where that door was. I believe that is all that I had for you to consider under my report, unless you have any questions.
You all have any questions for Mr. Hankins? If not, I guess, Mr. Hankins, we'll let you move on to the county administrator report.
I didn't see anything in here about about cameras. Have we done sent out any requests for bids on that or anything yet?
We have not, but we have heard you, and we will. We'll have to get at least a rough count of what we think that we'll need for the camera system. We agree it's a need. If it's the board's pleasure, we'll proceed to doing an RFP. I think everyone heard there were some security concerns that were raised last week, so we'd like at least to be able to see what went on if there is an emergency.
Yeah, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Hankins, what about the paid staff at the Max Meadows Fire Department? Have we made any ground there?
We still have just 4 applications, and I am still waiting for Chief Haywood to get back to me on the memorandum of agreement. I'll be glad to reach out to him again and see if he wants to have a discussion about that memorandum.
How long has he had it?
He's had it for a month, has he not?
Close to 6 weeks.
That's,
Can you reach out to him and put me on copy?
Yes, sir.
yeah, 'cause I thought that was pretty urgent.
To Mr. Hankins, please, sir.
Okay.
I'll copy all the members of the Fire and Rescue Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Under the county administrator report, we're going to ask that you set a public hearing again for March 22nd. So we'll have several public hearings that night. One of the things that you know is an unexpected, or at least I shouldn't say unexpected, but is a consequence of landing a major economic development prospect, is that it changes the way that your budget is shaped for that year. So we're going to have to ask for some changes to be made to the budget. It is in excess of 1% of our budget, so it is a significant change and requires a public hearing under state code. Some of the known costs that we're going to ask you to consider, we set aside $1 million in school construction funds from last year's funds that were returned by the school system. You're holding that. We would ask that those be able to use for the architectural and engineering fees related with the construction of the new middle school. They are well underway with that project, but to make sure that we don't have any delays, we need to make sure that we can fund that and fund it legally. For Watts Gap Tank, we're asking for $500,000 for engineering fees. The Fort Chiswell wastewater treatment plant, $450,000 in engineering fees. The Max Meadows sewer repair for the inflow and infiltration is a little over $1 million. The wastewater, we actually have that listed twice. The wastewater treatment plant fee is listed twice on your memo. $450,000 again. And then rail construction, $2 million for design and construction. Of course, some of that will be repaid, we believe, by the rail grant that the Commonwealth Transportation Board will consider for approval next month. But we need to at least change the budget to reflect that we're going to be undertaking that project. And that is out for bid. You'll see that noted in my, deeper down in my report.
Thank you,
So,
Mr. Mendez.
you also have a letter from Dr. Poole outlining the need for the A&E funds. We would ask that the board go ahead and set the public hearing for March 22nd for revising the budget to reflect these major projects.
Okay, so just one motion for all of the items
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
I'll make that motion, Madam Chair.
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Smith.
Second.
Okay, a second by Mr. Terry. Any questions or comments? To set the public hearing for March 22nd for the budget, for amending the budget for 2022. Okay, I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. I have a lot of public hearings that night.
From an informational standpoint, you see a copy of a letter from the Department of Historic Resources letting us know that property is being nominated for consideration on the Register of Historic Places and the Virginia Landmarks Register. That's the Foster House in Austinville, the large yellow house that you can see from the trail near the tunnel at the Austinville end of the trail. So you don't have to have, excuse me, it's the Fulton Farm, the Andrew and Sarah Fulton Farm. You don't have to take any action on that unless you want to have staff issue a letter of support or a letter of opposition. There's not a lot of impact from having a property added to the historic register. There are some benefits to the owner.
Does any board member have any questions or comments about that? Would it benefit them for us to provide a letter of support or?
Probably not.
Okay,
It's a routine part of the process for the Department of Historic Resources.
okay. Thank you. Our
third item is the school resource officer grant closure request. This is related to the school resource officer for Fort Chisholm. The sheriff's office has had a really hard time meeting the demands of the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which provides the funding on these grants. They require that you have to have an officer with at least 3 years of law enforcement experience serve as a school resource officer. It's been hard enough to find those folks to go on the road. I'm speaking correctly, Major Thompson. So the sheriff and his staff have preferred to put those folks on the road when they can. Since we can't fill that position, we are in danger of losing that position, and it is better for us to say we're going to withdraw from that grant and close it out than it is for DCJS to say you're not meeting your grant terms, we're going to take that grant away from you because it will harm our ability to go after these grants in the future. We can reapply. There's another grant round coming up, or we can apply next year to get these grants if the environment changes for our ability to hire law enforcement officers. So with that, what we would request is that you authorize staff to notify DCJS that we wish to close out this grant. What it means is that if we were to fill that position, we would be funding it out of county funds, out of general fund.
So just for clarification, we're not doing away with the SRO at Fort Chisholm?
That is not the intention. Major Thompson, I don't know if you're comfortable speaking on that or not, but from what I've talked about with Chief Deputy Klein, that is not the intention. It's just a matter of, this gives us more flexibility to be able to fill that position. We just can't fill that position and pay with DCJS dollars.
Right, I was just getting the clarification because the questions that we're going to get once people see this meeting on YouTube.
Yes. I do not want anybody to say that I was encouraging us to not have a Fort Chisholm school resource officer. That is an important function, but if we're going to fill it, we're going to need more flexibility in how we pay those folks.
So we're going from funding 6 positions to funding 7 positions.
Essentially, yes, sir.
And is that resource officer going to be a regular deputy, or is it going to be one of the
And
resource officers? I mean, I know they're different, and I know they're paid different, so I was just.
As I understand it, this would be a school resource officer, not a school security officer, so it would be someone who would be sworn. But it's been a little while since I talked with Chief Deputy Klein about this. If you'd like more details, I can provide those at your March meeting or by email.
How much time we got before you need to let them know that we're going to close?
It needs to happen pretty soon. They've already been making inquiries to Chief Deputy Klein.
So do we have time, do we have enough time to table it for 2 weeks and figure out exactly what it's going to cost us? Or do we need to act on it tonight?
I believe if you want to act on it in early March, you can do so. I haven't seen any notification letters that give me a drop dead deadline to meet. So I'll risk my reputation a little bit here and say that, it'll be okay to wait till the first meeting in March.
This is Stephen here. I would concur if you wanted to wait and have information from the sheriff or the chief deputy, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barry. It was the board's recommendation to table it into our next meeting. Okay, sounds great.
And then the 2 performance agreements for STS and Blue Star, those are still under review and will be presented to you at your March meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hankins. Okay, next we have the county attorney, Mr. Farthing.
You gotta turn my microphone on. I don't really have anything to report, Madam Chair. If you have any questions for me, I have miscellaneous tasks that I work on when I meet with Stephen.
you know, we talk about some tasks going on with Progress Park and that economic development stuff with some other miscellaneous things. So if you have any specific questions, I can address those, but, you know, I'm not very busy for you guys right now, which is probably a good thing for you, so.
Did,
You want to talk about?
the camera speed
Yeah.
monitoring?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that ordinance is, I think it's in the package.
It is.
The draft ordinance is in the package, I think under my report maybe. So, we had two ordinances that we looked at, one was from Alta Vista, and one was from Fairfax. The one from Fairfax had a little bit more detail and direction of how to implement this thing. And we liked that one a little better, so that's the one that we recommended and sort of modeled the Wythe County ordinance from. So you have a draft ordinance there. You don't have to have a vendor to adopt the ordinance. So if you would like to set a public hearing, you're welcome to do so to consider adopting the ordinance. I don't know if have they done an RFP for services?
I've drafted an RFP for advertisement pending your direction tonight.
Okay,
Of course, we can put out a procurement, and you don't have to accept those. If they come in, you change your mind, you decide not to pass the ordinance, we can just reject all of the respondents. But if you would like for us to go ahead and advertise with the thought that you want to be able to see soon after, assuming you pass an ordinance, you want to see prospective vendors at that time, then we would be prepared. And the procurement that I'm putting out is a cooperative procurement, so other local governments can jump onto what we're doing if they so desire.
okay. What's the board's wishes on that? Do y'all wanna set the public hearing?
Set the public hearing. We ain't got four others that day. Maybe more.
Let's go ahead and put it on 22nd.
To add it to the 22nd.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna do it, let's get it.
Yeah.
I
Get it
agree.
rolling.
Exactly.
I agree. So we just need a motion to set the public hearing in,
To consider the adoption of the ordinance, the camera speed monitoring ordinance.
okay. I'll entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Okay, got a motion by Mr. Horny, a second by,
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith. You all changed chairs, and it's gonna take me 2 years to get used to it. Okay, any, discussion or questions about that? If not, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Terry?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Is it the consensus of the board that I should go ahead and put out the procurement for services for a vendor?
I believe so. Yeah.
We'll do it.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for working on that, Mr. Farthing.
Yeah, that's all I have to report unless anyone has questions.
Any questions for Mr. Farthing?
The only question I have is, if I read this correctly, if I drive through a school zone and I'm doing 36 mile an hour, then I've got a $100 fine.
That's correct.
If I drive through this school zone and I'm doing 100 mile an hour, I still only have a $100 fine.
That's correct, but hopefully the town police or the county deputies will pick you up at that speed.
And it's only during,
He was
school
trying to think
hours.
if he could use his wife's sports car. He's thinking, I can afford $100.
You know, the speedometer does say 180, I'd like to, you know, just to see.
So, Mr. Cook, my understanding.
In that case, if they were tracked by a law enforcement officer, it would be a much higher fine.
Oh, I know, but I mean, if there's no officer there and I go through it at 100 mile an hour,
It is just limited to what the state code gives us the ability
same
to
fine
do.
as if I went, you know. I wouldn't want to get paid a fine anyhow, but it doesn't seem, if you're going that fast, you need more than $100, you know? I mean, I don't.
beats what we had before, I guess. Because if there's no officer there before, they wouldn't get caught, so it helped. Okay, any more, questions or anything for Mr. Farthing?
The one benefit of having a system like this would be that if an officer noticed somebody had gone through that school zone, they would have the tag, that they would have the owner's information, and they'd be able to go to that person and say, we caught you doing 100 through the Fort Chisholm High School zone. We want to talk to you about your future driving privileges. You wouldn't be able to act on it beyond that, but, you know, you'd certainly have the ability to go knock on a door.
But so it can be turned over to them, they just can't.
Like, there would be limits on how they could act.
Okay. Anything else? Do we have anything else under new business, Mr. Hankins?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's see, next item on the agenda is board reports. We will start with Mr. Cook.
I have nothing at this time.
Okay, Mr. Burnett?
The only thing of interest, and I don't think they've made it official yet, but there's two businesses in Poplar Camp. One was a Lunch Bucket Diner, they've closed up. And then the Oval Store has been out of gas and closed up for several weeks. So I'm expecting them to say they've thrown in the towel and given up on that as well, which I hate to hear that because they are a local family that's really poured their heart into them businesses. So that's the only thing I've got.
I hate that. Okay. Mr. Smith?
Madam Chairman, I have a few things. One, Mr. Hankins, is if we can get Mr. Fowler to look at the School Street going up to Max Meadows Elementary. I got a call yesterday that the roads are caving in on the side and the ditch lines, causing a hazard under the weight of the buses right through that area. So if he could look at that. Also, the speed on Lots Gap and Route 94 from Fort Chisel Road up to about St. Paul Pentecostal Holiness Church. Still getting complaints from both my district and Jesse's district, the folks that live on that road through that area. It's the curviest part of the road. In that particular area, speeds are pretty rough, and I know Sheriff's Department they do a good job on both of those routes, and we realize that they can't be there all the time, but we need to look at, especially on 94, lowering that speed limit through there. Not that it'll help, but it may help some of the residents that live in that area. Progress Park, the trucks, if you go through there, you'll see where they're pulling off side of the road. They've got no parking signs that they've run over. They've dug up the sides of the road where it's wet. With the rain that's going on now, it's only gonna get worse. So if we can work on getting those folks moved on or help the economy of Wythe County. And then again, with Progress Park, I know we done the quota hunt for the deer. Got a lot of interest in spring turkey hunting. We may have to cut the zones down and limit the number of people in there. It would be an archery hunt. If we can pull that off, a lot of people would be interested in applying for that. And then the last thing I got was along the lines of what Mr. Burnett was talking about, only this is a new business that started. There's a new sports complex with County Sports Complex. It's actually in a building that we actually looked at a year or so ago. Mr. Kirby has got a sports complex down, so if you got kids that need to practice baseball, soccer, or wrestling, they have a building right down on Chapman Road. Feel free to contact them. It's a pretty neat building, so.
Very exciting.
I'm a big baseball fanatic, so anytime you can get a kid in there practicing baseball, that's what we need to be doing. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Horny?
I have two things. I had a call the other day, and I don't know exactly how we could do it or if it could be done, but he was complaining about where they're putting in the high-speed internet cable, that the landowners were not notified that they were going to be coming through there. And I can sort of understand his point. I mean, nowadays, somebody goes across your property and you never know who it is or what they're doing. If there's any way that we can start notifying people that they're going to be doing something like that. I wanted to tell him it was probably on social media, but he probably didn't have internet, so it probably wouldn't help him. And the other thing is sort of the same thing I had emailed you about. Did you have any idea on the time frame for, did you ever find out when they may be getting it where?
Still waiting on an answer on that.
Okay.
I did reach out to them last week. We had several complaints from your district about
I can imagine, because they're all over the place.
folks in flower beds and damaging stream banks and that sort of thing with ATVs as they drive through. pulling cable. So I've relayed those complaints on to the folks at Point Broadband, and I'm waiting on an answer for that too.
I can relay it to the crews if you want me to, because there's one of them parks in my backyard every night. I had a complaint from them, but their complaint was, please turn the electric fence off. That's all I have, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Horny. Mr. Terry?
Nothing at this time, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And I do not have anything at this time. Next item on the agenda is closed meeting. Code of Virginia, Section 2.2-3.
Actually, Ms. Lawson,
Bill,
I
no?
don't know that we need that meeting tonight unless
Okay.
the board thinks that we do. That was for performance reviews, and I believe you can postpone that to
Table it?
your March 8th meeting.
Anyone opposed?
I don't know, cheeseburger will be here then.
I don't know. It might be longer.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, we will table that. In that case, let's see, do we have anything else to discuss, Mr. Hankins?
Now, ma'am, you do have a couple of informational items in your package, but nothing further for action tonight.
Okay. Mr. Farthing, anything?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Collins? Do you have anything? Okay, well, if nothing else, we are adjourned.